To start, I'm going to take off my wheel with a 19mm socket, take off all 5 of your lug nuts. And take off your wheel. I'm going to start by breaking this jam nut free. It's a 24mm nut, so use your wrench. And sometimes they're pretty stuck on there, so I'm going to use a rubber mallet. Be careful when you do this. There we go, it's breaking free. You don't need to remove it or anything, but just loosen it up so that it lets go of this outer tie rod. Now with a 15mm, let's remove this nut. Take this off. I'm going to put the nut back on a couple threads to hold the tie rod, and then use a hammer right here. That's going to break it free from the knuckle. Perfect, that's what you're looking for. Remove the nut, remove the tie rod. Now when you remove this, count the amount of turns that it takes to take it off. That way when you put the new one on, you can get it approximately to where it was. And you'll still need a professional alignment after this, but this will get you close. I had about 19.5 turns. Of course, for you it might be different, but there you go. So I put some locking pliers on the inner tie rod here just because I can't remove this nut. It's pretty stuck on here, as you can see. So I'm going to take my 24mm socket with my air gun and try to drive this off. Hopefully the locking pliers hold. Perfect. If that doesn't work out for you, you can always apply some heat, and once you heat up the nut, it should come right off. There it is. Now I want to remove this clamp for the bellows boot. Squeeze it with some needle nose pliers, slide it right off. Now if you follow the bellows boot in, you'll see a clamp that looks about like that. I'm going to put a pry bar up against it and then use a hammer on the end of my pry bar and hammer the clamp till it comes off. Okay, that popped free. Let's remove it. This is a single-use clamp, so you'll have to either source a new one or use a wire tie to secure the boot at the end. Now you grab the boot, just pull it straight out. It should pop off the rack. There it is. Now pull it off of the tie rod. Sometimes they get a little stuck on here. I'm going to stick a screwdriver in here, lift up this part of it just to try and help it along. There we go. Take the boot off. I'm just going to wipe off the grease over here. That way my tie rod tool can grab onto this and not potentially slip on the grease. Now grab your tie rod tool. They make different kinds. This is the one that I have. It basically clamps onto this piece and allows you to spin it right off. Now I'm going to use a long extension and my long ratchet, try to break this free. There we go, that broke free. I can't really spin it very far because this is going to hit, but let's remove the nuts. All right, so to remove the tool, it kind of snugged itself up a little bit, but grab it with some pliers, remove it all the way. There's your outer tie rod, and you'll notice it has this little green spacer here. You definitely want to save this. Take your new tie rod and put your green spacer in here. Now let's reinstall the tie rod. If you want to, you can put thread locker on the threads of the tie rod, but the original one didn't have any, so I didn't put any on. Now let's tighten that up. Put on your tool. Insert your ratchet or breaker bar, whatever you're using. When you tighten this, you don't want to go tight to where it's twisting the whole rack. You just want to snug this up and leave it at that. So I'm going to go about this much. It stopped. I'm trying to turn it, doesn't turn, so that's exactly where I'm going to leave it. Let's remove our tool. Now I'm going to pull the tie rod down and add a little bit of grease here. This will help the joint last longer. It's nice and lubricated, and it'll prevent moisture from potentially building up in here. You don't need a whole lot. A little bit will go a long way. And then right over here is where the boot sits, the outer part of the boot. So I like to grease this part up. That way the boot can slide easily when your alignment professional turns this for alignment purposes. Now I have a wire tie. I'm going to put it around the end of the boot here. This is going to be my clamp replacement. Slide it over. Make sure this wire tie goes through where it's supposed to go. I'll set it back on the tie rod or the boot after. Push this on all the way. Now make sure this is seated. Now grab the boot and push it over the steering rack. You'll feel it seat into place. Right now it looks like over here it's not fully seated. And I think that just went on. Let's double check from underneath. Yep, that's good. Let's tighten up the wire tie. In order to give it a little extra tightness, I'm going to grab some needle nose pliers, cut off the excess. Perfect. I'm going to replace this outer clamp with another wire tie because mine felt a little bit weak. If yours lost its spring tension, you definitely want to replace it, otherwise water can get in there. So I'll put this on, make sure it's nice and tight. Cut off the excess. Perfect. I like to coat the threads of the tie rod with some anti-seize. That way both the nut and the outer tie rod don't get stuck on in the future. Grab the new nut, start it on, and let's just drive it in a little bit. A little more. That's good. Get your outer tie rod and put it on the same amount of turns that it took to take off the old one. I have 19 turns right there. Again, you'll still need an alignment, but this will get you close. Let's get the jam nut a little bit closer. And now bring the tie rod up into the knuckle. Line it up with the knuckle. Press it through. Put your castle nut on. Let's snug this up. This is now a 16mm nut. Let's snug it up. Now torque it to 35 foot-pounds. It's 35 right there. Make sure the castle nut slot lines up with the hole for the cotter pin. Mine doesn't quite line up. I have to go a little bit more. You always want to tighten to line these up and not loosen. A little more. Right there should be good. Let's put the cotter pin through. Slide it through. Bend it over. Lock it down. Let's lock in the jam nut. Make sure it's nice and snug, and then straighten out the tie rod so it's not sitting at an angle on the knuckle. Let's put the wheel back on. Start on all of your lug nuts, snug them up, and torque them to 100 foot-pounds.